if you could start by telling your name and spelling it.
My name's James L. Pursell, Jr., spelled P-U-R-S-E-L-L.
And if you could give me an idea of when you started with the CHP and when you finished with the CHP and where the Manson arrest fit into all that.
I began with Highway Patrol, hired on October 1, 1957. In December of 57, I was assigned to the Compton area, which was changed to South Los Angeles. 4 years in Compton, and then transferred to the Bishop area with assignment to the Lone Pine resident post. I did 7 years in Lone Pine, and then moved out to the Death Valley resident post. While there, the Manson arrests occurred in 1969. I then promoted to sergeant in 1974. Was assigned to the West Valley patrol area in San Fernando Valley. Stayed there for 2 years and then returned to the Bishop area, where I stayed until I retired in 1989.
Let's just start at the beginning, make it simple. Let's start with, what do you remember about, where were you when you heard about the Tate LaBianca murders, and what impression did it make on you?
At the time of the homicides, my family and I were vacationing in Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, and the homicides did obviously make the news back there, but not to the extent of California. So we were aware of it. On returning to Death Valley, when we came home, being as isolated as it was, there was really not much further news accounts that we were able to get there in Death Valley. Anything we learned was from either TV or newspapers. There was nothing officially over law enforcement channels or anything like that.
Did reading about it make any particular impression on you?
Other than the horror of the mass homicides, no, it was something in Los Angeles, considerable distance away, not something that involved us.
How did you get involved in the investigation?
I had been to in-service training in mid.
Sorry, you know what? Can you start again?
I had just returned home from a week's in-service training at our academy, and more truck.
All right, once you ask the question again.
How did you become involved in the investigation?
I had just returned to Death Valley from a week's in-service training at our academy in Sacramento on the 18th of September of '69. On the 19th of September, I was taking my wife and young son to Lone Pine for shopping. Being a one-man resident post, I had access to the patrol car for certain personal tasks, since I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. En route to Lone Pine, I had a National Park Service radio, Death Valley National Monument, and on their frequency, I began hearing conversation where their roads and trail crew had discovered a piece of highway construction equipment, a large rubber-tired front-end loader that had been left at a job site up in the northwest portion of Death Valley National Monument, and it had been set ablaze. And so the road and trail crews was calling for the park rangers to come up and make an investigation. And my wife knew that I would want to get involved in this, so we got to Panamint Springs Resort, and she says, okay, you can leave me here. And so I left my wife and my little son at Panamint Springs Resort to fend for themselves all day long while I went to assist the park rangers. I drove to an area called Hunter Mountain. The park rangers had followed a set of tire tracks, rather unusual, from the site of the burned loader to Hunter Mountain. And I met them there. And at that location, we found a 1969 Ford sedan, partially stripped, hidden in the trees. Around the vehicle and in the vehicle, numerous items of female clothing. We ran the vehicle, and it turned out it was a Hertz rent-a-car. It was not reported as stolen or anything. So at that point, the park rangers had no more tracks to follow. So I returned to Panamint Springs and picked up my wife and continued on to Lone Pine. As a result of that arson, the National Park Service, the rangers of the National Park Service, continued searching the Panamint Mountain Range for any kind of clues or witnesses to the arson on their loader. A party came into the Park Service headquarters who happened to be the U.S. Commissioner here in Bishop, and he reported a group of persons known as hippies in those years in the Saline Valley, which is adjacent to Death Valley National Monument. And he described them as driving a red Toyota Land Cruiser and a couple of dune buggies. So as...
I'm sorry, I'm going to cut it. We got like...
Between all of us, if you hear him start to go without doing that. I know I get so involved listening to the story because I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I think we're okay. Right? Does that sound okay?
So why don't you start with that one again, Fran? And you could shorten it up a little bit, you know. I mean, it can be as simple as I was on vacation with my family in Colorado, heard about it, came back home, and you know, just figured it was another LA crime. Didn't think any more about it.
Okay, yeah.
Make it a little easier on your.
Okay.
And we have speed.
Okay, where were you when you first heard about the Tate LaBianca murders, and what did you think about it?
My family and I were vacationing in Colorado, and even though it was newsworthy, it wasn't that much back in Colorado, but it was just something that, as tragic as it was, something that happened in Los Angeles.
Okay,
I think the next one was
no.
I was reading about it.
Okay, and let's just give it an overview answer of how did the auto theft investigation begin?
The Rangers of the National Park Service were pursuing an arson case on a piece of equipment of theirs. One of their park rangers, while checking out canyons in the Panamint Mountains, came across a red Toyota Land Cruiser and a dune buggy. The Toyota Land Cruiser had a commercial California license plate on it, which he brought to me. I ran it through California DMV, and it was not stolen, but it turned up it belonged to an old Dodge pickup truck not the Toyota that it was on. Subsequent to that, the park ranger, Dick Powell, continued checking leads in the Panamint Mountain Range. And on the 29th of September of 1969, he was going into an area called Goler Wash at the southwest corner of Death Valley National Monument, and he asked me if I would like to go along. Having never been there, excuse me, and it was a day off. I had the time.
Can we go back to, he asked me to go along?
Yeah, okay. Dick Powell, park ranger, asked me to go along with him, and as I had never been in that part of the monument before, and it was my day off, I accepted the ride. I wanted to see what was down in that area. In the afternoon of the 29th, we arrived at an area called Barker Ranch, which is really a misnomer. Ranch, you think of agriculture, but this is was probably built as a mining, a prospector's cabin. We drove up to the front of the cabin and noticed a rail dune buggy parked in front, minus the engine. About that time, two young girls exited the cabin, and we approached them and asked them if they lived there, questioned them just generally. They had very little to say to us. We then asked where they indicated they did not live at the cabin, they were just visiting there. So we asked where the occupants of the cabin were, and they told us that there was a prospector who lived there, and at the moment he was down in the Panamint Valley at a little town called Ballarat. So Park Ranger Powell and I decided to continue down Goler Wash into the Panamint Valley and see if we could meet the party who they were talking about. And while traveling down the canyon, we did in fact meet two males in an old Dodge military pickup truck coming up the canyon. We had them stop. Park Ranger Powell took the passenger, who was a teenage boy, off to one side, began talking to him, and I took the driver, middle-aged fellow, off to the other side and began talking to him. And the pickup was loaded with automotive parts, ignition parts, lamps, oil, batteries, hoses, belts, and a large commercial movie camera. So in the conversation, I finally asked this fellow why, since none of this belonged to him, why he was going to all this trouble to transport all this gear up and down the canyon. And he hesitated for a long time and seemed to think about it. And then he said he thought his life depended on it. So all this time the pickup had been idling. So I told him, okay, turn the pickup off and let's really start talking about what's going on here. So he says, well, the battery is dead. It won't start again. Can we return to Barker Ranch? And I said, that's fine. We'll do that. And then we mentioned that there were also two girls back up there at the cabin and asked who they were. And both these males adamantly deny that there was anyone else at the cabin. And we said we were just there. We saw them.
So we stopped for some water?
Yeah.
For some water.
This is for areas out there.
But you said you hadn't been there, but you
No,
had similar
no.
areas.
But it's very, very like other areas in the monument, just a long
Also
way.
that you had been to other areas
Oh, yeah.
that are like as rugged.
Well,
Do you think we should have an off-duty officer with us? No? Can you bring your gun?
if you want.
Well, if there's a snake or something, yeah,
No.
I think we'd all feel better.
Could you give us all each a gun as well?
Yeah. Hey, park rangers don't want you shooting their snakes.
Well, we don't know what we'll encounter.
You relocate him, you don't shoot.
They asked you if they could return to Barker Ranch because they were afraid that if they turned the battery up, they wouldn't get their car started anymore. So you pick it up from there.
Okay. We then said, okay, take the pickup on up to the ranch, and we'll follow you, and we'll sit down and have a long talk. Which they did. When we returned to the ranch, the females were nowhere to be found. They were gone. There's a little outbuilding beside the main Barker Ranch house. We entered that building and proceeded to interview the youngster's name, or the teenage boy's name was Brooks Poston. The prospector was Paul Crockett. And we had quite a conversation, and it was really fascinating. I got the impression that they were trying to convey so much to us, but without saying a whole lot. They made sure we realized that the group of people who were up there, and they tried to tell us that it was a group who was making a movie, but this group knew who came and went from the cabin, even what was said while they were in the cabin. Personally, about this time,
We just had like a dropout. Did your sound go dead for a second?
I didn't hear it here, but I heard that.
I just heard like, just for a second, like something just dropped out.
Yeah, I didn't hear it drop out, but I heard.
You know, do you think if I close the garage door, that'll help?
It
Get some
could.
sound out?
Poston and Crockett asked you.
Speak.
What did Poston and Crockett ask you when you asked them to turn off the motor?
Crockett then explained that the battery on the truck was dead, and if they did turn it off, they would not be able to get it going again, so he asked if they could drive it on back to the cabin, and we agreed, followed them up to the cabin. When we returned to the cabin, the two girls that we'd seen previously were gone. So Brooks and Paul took us into a small outbuilding adjacent to the main cabin, and we all sat in there, and we began questioning them more specifically about this group and what they were doing. And it was interesting. I got the impression that they were both trying to convey so much to us, but really without saying a whole lot. And they made sure we realized that the group was in the area. They knew who entered and left the cabin and the area, and even what was said in the cabins. And about this time I was beginning to get a little nervous and made sure my back was to a wall. And they described these rituals that this group conducted at night, that the leader of the group would get in a white robe and lead his followers in chants and things like that. And then Brooks Poston was an aspiring musician. He picks up a guitar and he begins strumming soft, melancholy music. And I think Dick Powell thought the same thing. We were both wondering just what in the world do we have up here. So we finally concluded our discussion with them. We decided we would return or head back the way we had come in. We had approached Barker Ranch from the east, and on the approach we had noticed a couple of little draws off the dirt road where obviously tire tracks had led into the draws. So we left Brooks and Paul at the cabin. We drove back, entered one draw. Dick Powell was driving our Jeep. He got out and he went up the little embankment on the left side of the Jeep. I got out on the right, climbed the embankment on the right side, looked down into the adjacent draw, nothing on my side, and then I heard Dick whistle, turned around, looked, and he is waving to me to come his way, and then he takes off running and disappears from view as he drops down into the draw on the other side. I ran down through the draw where we had the Jeep, up the little hill on his side, dropped down into the adjacent draw, and suddenly realized I'm in the midst of a group of females who are attempting to hide behind creosote bushes, which are extremely sparse desert foliage, and you cannot hide behind one. And I also realized that these females ran the gamut from totally nude to totally clothed. And I looked up the draw, and Dick Powell was chasing or running away from us, and then he disappeared from view. In the area where I lost sight of him, perhaps 100, 150 feet up the draw, there was obviously a camp. So I told all the girls to come on up, let's go to up to the camp there and have a little chat. The one nude female turned out to be Squeaky Frome. She was about the only one that would have anything to say to me. When we got into the camp, we discovered that there were two vehicles, the red Toyota Land Cruiser that Dick Powell had seen earlier in another location, and a dune buggy covered with tarps and sleeping bags. Clearly tried to camouflage them. So I began asking these girls where they were from, what they were doing there, what was going on. But the only thing they'd tell me is they were a Girl Scout troop from the Bay Area, and they asked if Dick Powell and I would like to join them as their leaders. About this time, a young male appeared from a little side draw. He identified himself as Charles Montgomery. He claimed he was simply hitchhiking over on Highway 395 in the Owens Valley, and this group of females picked him up, and he had no idea what they were there for, what they were doing. About this time, Dick Powell finally came back to where I was, and he indicated that he had been chasing a male subject who did outrun him. We take a break. Go back and God, I'm beginning to forget their names.
What? Montgomery was Charles Tex Watson.
Right, yeah. And but the females, it was
And the guy
Susan.
Manson, right? The one
Yeah,
who was
Susan
yeah,
Atkins,
we were, yeah.
Patricia.
Krenwinkel.
Leslie Van Houten.
About 6 minutes left. We're at 25. Yeah, 25, about 31, 30. We could all go to about 31.
Okay, why don't we just finish this part of it before you ask another question, we need to change to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's pick it up with who was Dick Powell chasing.
Eventually, we learned that the subject Dick Powell was chasing was Charlie Manson. The fellow that identified himself to me as Montgomery was Charles Tex Watson, who it turned out was the mechanic of the group, and he's the one that kept their vehicles going. Also present was Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, most of the family. After getting about as much information as we could from them, I proceeded to take the identification numbers off both motor vehicles. Also, each vehicle had a scabbard with a shotgun on it. I took the numbers off of those, and we then proceeded to head back west down the canyon toward Ballarat. Our problem was the only radio communication we had was a little 2.5 watt handy-talkie Park Service radio, and we were totally isolated from our mountaintop repeater. So we had to leave the canyon, go through Ballarat perhaps 30 miles before we were in a location where we could get radio contact. I had previously taken the number off the dune buggy in front of the cabin also. Park Service ran the VIN numbers through CHP and motor vehicles, and all 3 motor vehicles came back as stolen. So at this point, Dick Powell asked his superior for instructions, and I contacted my Sergeant Ray Haley in Lone Pine to see what steps they wanted us to take next. And we waited a few hours while people were making decisions, and they finally radioed back to us that we were to remain at the mouth of Goler Wash, and we would be met early a.m. the next morning by some more officers, and then a team of officers would also be coming in from the east side, from Death Valley, and the plan was to return to Barker Ranch at daybreak the following morning. So Dick Powell and I camped out at the mouth of Goler Wash that night, and we were driving a small government Jeep with a half cab. Neither one of us wanted to lay down on the sand with the scorpions and the snakes, so Dick Powell, who was taller than I, laid across the 2 bucket seats, and I climbed on top of this half cab, and we tried to get some rest that night, but I don't think either one of us did. About 4:30 the following morning, our backup units arrived, and then we all drove up Goler Wash again to Barker Ranch. Dick and I, since we'd been there before, the team stopped short of Barker Ranch, and Dick and I hiked into the building, and we knocked on the door of the little outbuilding where we had talked with Brooks and Paul the day before, and they came to the door, and they seemed genuinely shocked to see us, and we asked why, and they said, well, Manson had come into the cabin the afternoon before, grabbed a shotgun, ran from the cabin, and shortly thereafter they had heard 2 shotgun blasts, and they thought sure that Dick and I had been killed. And this has always been something that we found strange, because neither Dick nor I ever heard any weapons being fired, no shotgun blasts. I don't know if it was because we had already left the area or what. But anyway, when we spoke to Brooks and Paul the next morning, they indicated that the group had left the area, and in fact the rail dune buggy that had been without an engine in front of the cabin, we learned as soon as we left, all mining cabins have an old dump nearby with the rusty tin cans and all that. Tex Watson went to the dump, dug around under the cans, and pulled a whole VW engine out wrapped in a tarp, threw it into the dune buggy, and away they went. So
Stop you here, because I want to double check his name. I'm not sure if it's Watson or Watson. Going back to Tex Watson, what had he done?
Tex Watson, the mechanic of the group, had pulled a complete Volkswagen engine out from under the trash pile, placed it in the rail dune buggy in front of the cabin, and then the group with vehicles had all disappeared into the desert area. We searched, it's a vast area, we searched a lot of it, but never did find any individuals that date. So in the search, though, we did find 2 more dune buggies, which it did turn out were also stolen. We then disabled the dune buggies, as we were in such a remote area we really didn't know how we were going to get them out, so we figured we would leave them there temporarily, but we disabled them so they would not be easily moved. And then we secured the area. Everybody left.
Okay. Did you pay another visit to the ranch? What prompted it?
We did pay another visit to the ranch in the period early October of '69, probably the first week of October. Brooks Poston and Paul Crockett began to feel that they were no longer welcome in the Barker Ranch area. So one night they hiked out over Mangle Pass through Butte Valley and down to Warm Springs, east of Barker Ranch, where they caught a ride on an ore truck into Shoshone. In Shoshone, there was a deputy sheriff named Don Ward who encountered them, took them to his substation, and proceeded to interview them and taped the interview. He had a long, complete interview with them, and again, it was about what Dick Powell and I had learned previously. Don Ward then took that tape to the sheriff and began playing it for the sheriff to show the sheriff something was going on up there. However, the sheriff didn't believe it, and at that point pretty well decided that the sheriff's office would not be involved in anything going on up there. So Don Ward came to me and stated that he was out of the picture, but something was going on up there. So I contacted my supervisor again, Sergeant Haley. He went to our area commander, Lieutenant Howard Hurlbut, who in turn contacted our zone commander in Fresno, and all agreed that it should be checked out. With all the stolen vehicles that we had, we definitely had an auto theft ring. So they all agreed to regroup again and enter the area for another time. And of course, National Park Service rangers were right there with us. To digress a little.
Sorry, can I interrupt you? And Barry, can you widen out? Can you tell us what...
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second, and now we have to speak.
I did not hear the tape that Don Ward produced. However, he told me it was the same story of the rituals going on up in the area. And to digress a little bit, when Dick Powell and I had interviewed Crockett and Poston, after the interview, when we were finally out talking together, Dick Powell suggested to me that as a result of news releases about the Tate and LaBianca homicides, where the press referred to ritualistic aspects of the crime, Dick Powell suggested to me that perhaps this group had something to do with those crimes, and I thought about it and I had to agree with him. So we made the decision at that time that if and when we arrested these people for auto theft, we would make sure that our district attorney's office in Inyo County notify the Los Angeles district attorney's office about who and what we had. But I never heard the tape that Don Ward was able to produce, but he indicated it was the same stories of the rituals going on up there. The leader, Charles Manson, who thought he was Jesus Christ and dressed in the white robe and led his followers in the chants. Some drug usage, although we did not encounter any drugs. This was rumored to us that drugs were used in the area. We learned that drugs were used sparingly. The girls would be rewarded by having drugs. The boys would be rewarded by having their choice of the girls. But all in all, we found that we were unable to develop any great drug usage up there.
Okay. You stop taking a second?